Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new ProRevenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "Make me work multiple jobs then try to fire me." You really don't know what you had until it's gone. I used to work for a manufacturing company who makes waste containers, dumpsters and such. At first it was a good job with a good manager and no problems. I enjoyed the work. It was a dirty, physically demanding job but kept me in good shape. I could just put in my earbuds and cruise through the day without any issues. My initial job was to prep the units for painting by polishing imperfections with a sander and grinding down the areas that were too rough, as well as cleaning them up after the welders were done with them. But after a while they kept laying off so many people and dumping their jobs on me that eventually towards the end of my time there, I was quality control, helped the painter, was a warehouseman, finisher, grinder and also janitor. Oh, and for no additional pay beyond the small cost of living raises we got once in a while. After about a year of working for this company, prior to having all these jobs dumped on me without any issues, new management showed up. And as they like to do, they started making all kinds of changes just for the sake of making changes. Things that made jobs harder with no benefit, cutting corners that should not be cut and generally hurting productivity and workplace safety. The change in management was bad, but it was not the end of the world. It made things harder for no real reason, but all in all, things were still manageable. Until I ended up off work for about a month with a collapsed lung that I still, to this day, believe was caused by working conditions there and lack of ventilation and PPE. When I came back to work, I was on light duty for quite some time since I had a surgery to repair the lung and prevent it from collapsing again. I went from the golden boy who they called on when the crap had to get done to the red-headed stepchild of the company. Management was doing everything they could to get me to quit. They would throw my tools away, hide my stools so I couldn't use them while I was working. Hassle me over things like my earbuds citing safety as to why I couldn't use them, even though OSHA themselves told me it was not an issue. The production manager would lie about things and write me up for non-existent violations. Refused to fix my bay doors that had been crashed into by forklifts numerous times that had to be closed and opened with a crowbar by two people since the track was mangled. Other things include the company giving everybody in the plant raises except for me. Catching me 5 minutes before leaving work to go on my weekend and informing me that we had to work the next day and selectively enforcing safety rules, and even making rules up on the fly. After about 6 months, I had had enough and decided that if they want to constantly cite policy and safety rules to duck with me, then I could play that game too. I would make this manufacturing plant the safest company on the planet and ensure the policy was followed to the exact letter. This was now my mission. I began to slow my work way down and only do the jobs I was hired and paid to do. Instead of doing the workload of 10 employees with nothing in return, they now got exactly one person's worth of labor out of me. Customers' orders began stacking up, deliveries were late. Bad welds and welds that got missed during production were overlooked, causing the units to have to be repainted when they had to go back to the welding lines to be fixed. The warehouse became a wreck with containers backed up to the point that people did not even have room to work. I went from completing a large unit at 30 minutes to it taking me 2.5 hours on the same one. Not to mention all the repairs that needed to be done that were missed during production, when before I would have caught them before the units even left the production line. Other petty things I did included not showing on Saturday to work when the manager would catch me at the last second and tell me I had to. I took to cutting out the text in the employee handbook citing that working unscheduled hours required management to notify you 3 days in advance. Leaving a letter with that portion of the handbook on his desk the following Monday. There was nothing they could do since I was following the handbook to the letter. At this point, it was a game of who would blink first. They could lay me off and I could draw unemployment on them, or I would quit. Next on the list was safety. They liked to hassle me so much about trivial things that I figured they would appreciate me going through the plant and documenting every single last OSHA violation, safety violation and anything else that was not right. I had a notebook that was filled with violations from one end of the plant to another, things like crane lifts that were being used improperly with J-hooks that OSHA previously warned the company about, the same J-hooks they liked to hide every time OSHA came through the plant. welders that had frayed cords around puddles of water, tools being left on top of units that could fall off and hit someone, lack of ventilation, particle counts that were too high, forklifts that were not serviced enough. I tagged out equipment that technically shouldn't be used in its current state, and locked out the forklifts that needed brakes or any sort of maintenance. Eventually, the production manager took the bait and untagged one of the forklifts I had locked out due to having bad brakes. Anybody who knows the lockout procedure can understand what a massive mess that is. Once I compiled my list of improvements, I went to the government official who was overseeing safety and procedure since we often worked on government orders. I gave him my notebook, informed him of my manager taking the lockout off a defective forklift, then went on break and waited. About 30 minutes later, I saw my manager walking back from the head office and looking upset beyond belief. Later, I heard from someone who knows him that he got punished severely, especially for the forklift. From then on, he avoided me and wouldn't even speak to me or look at me. After that, I continued to slow my work pace down and got a bit of satisfaction each day from the complete crap show the place had become and how backed up it was every single day. After I left the company, I heard they hired 5 guys to do my job and that they still did a sh*t job at it. Had they treated me better instead of coming at me as they did, they would have been still getting the top quality of work from me that they got when I first joined them, and things would have gone along just fine. I can't even imagine how much money I must have cost that company by sticking to the exact letter of the rules. Quote. The next one is titled, Cash His Social Security After His Death? I'll notify the authorities for you. Serves them right. The man who owned the house next door rented it out to 4 non-related people who each had their own bedroom but shared a bath. One day my 4-year-old son was riding big wheels down our driveway and he was stung by a wasp. I noticed that there was a very large wasp nest on the porch in front of his house by my driveway and mentioned it to him the next time he was there picking up the rent. When I told him the story, he said, "Not my problem. Keep your kid in the house and you won't have a problem." Yes, I was upset, but I was more upset when I mentioned it to one of his renters, an elderly lady of about 75. She said that he hadn't put oil in the tank in weeks and that her room was cold every night. She said the paint was peeling in her room and that the sink they all used kept backing up. She also asked me if I noticed that the 80-year-old gentleman who lived in one of the other rooms was gone. I had noticed that I had not seen him for a few weeks. He was always nice and would sit on the porch and sometimes come over when my son and I were out just to talk. Well, apparently he had passed away and this bastard made an agreement with the man's nephew, who I had never met, who was supposed to be taking care of him, to not let anyone know he died. The plan was for the nephew to cash his social security checks as if the poor man was still alive, and they would split the money. So long as they kept the address going and kept signing the man's name to the check, they were in the money. What bastards. First I called the town and told them that the man next door was renting to elderly people and leaving them without heat, and that the living conditions he left them in were deplorable. Then I contacted the Social Security office and told them, although I didn't know the man's last name or when he died, but it had been at least 2 months back. I did know his address and his first name. I told them about the scam the nephew and the owner of the house were pulling. They said they would look into it. Now I wish I could tell you that both those gentlemen got what they deserve. What I can tell you is that 2 weeks later a man around his 30s was moving stuff out of the house. I went over and asked who he was, as I knew he didn't live there. He said, "Oh, I'm George's nephew, my uncle passed and I'm getting his stuff." So I do know the scam was over anyway. A month after that, the house was on the market, and Miss Susan, the elderly lady from upstairs, said when she called her son and told him about what was going on at the house, he said she could come to live with him. Apparently she had never mentioned to him about the heat and the paint because she didn't want him to worry. She was really excited about moving in with her son, and I was excited she was going to be taken care of. I don't regret turning them in at all. If what comes around goes around, there is a nice place in hell for both of them. Preying on the elderly is just disgusting. The next one is titled, The Problem Is With the Book, Not Me. This revenge story is 2 years in the making and is long, so my apologies. 2 years ago I started a distance PhD program. My very first full semester in the program consisted of an intro course, which is basically, welcome back to school. Here's how to do research. Here's how to do APA citations. A lot of it focused on proper APA writing, and one of the first assignments was just doing a simple abstract. Okay, I can do that. I pull out my trusty APA guide, which I had just bought online, and complete the assignment. And I get a D. I was completely shocked. I'd followed the book to the letter. How the hell did I get a D? I messaged my professor and told her I followed the book exactly, and she did the academic equivalent of patting me on the head and saying, "Of course you did, dear." By this time I was thinking I was out of my mind. I sent a strongly worded letter to the APA that basically said, "What the hell is wrong with you guys selling a book like this?" They wrote back and did the business equivalent of patting me on the head and saying, "We're sorry you don't like our book." Then I started really looking at the book. And I started noticing a lot of typos. Eventually, everything clicked and I realized, holy crap, these are OCR, optical character recognition, errors. This is a scanned and reprinted counterfeit textbook. So I took a bunch of pictures of the errors and did what any good internet user would, scribble on them in MS Paint with red arrows, put snarky captions on them and upload them. My first thought was, wow, this poor seller got taken advantage of by whoever printed their books. In retrospect, this was probably stupidly naive, but that seems to be a common theme in my life. So I wrote them a very polite email and sent them the photos of the book and said, "I think you might have been provided a pirated version of the book." Well, the seller didn't appreciate that and wrote me back a super nasty email saying that my suggestion that they were selling counterfeits was very offensive. All their books were brand new from the publishers, and that I was an idiot they were going to report to the police for slander. Okay, I was pretty upset about the sh*TTY grade, but you wrote me back and swore at me and threatened to report me to the police? Now I'm upset. I start by looking up their Amazon seller profile and I notice a couple of other people have reported that books received from this seller were missing pages or had other unusual issues. This is the part where I went full internet stalker. I searched for their company name and found it was a registered LLC. I got the address from their state's listing of small business registrations, which turned out to be a fairly nice looking house per Google Maps, then looked up property tax records on the house to get the owner's name. I found the owner on Facebook and found they had a business website listed under a completely different name that they'd shared all over their FB timeline, and their website was pretty blatant about the whole thing. "We offer you deeply discounted prices by having books printed on demand." I don't think that's how publishing works. I reported them to Amazon, where I bought the book. And Books. And Biblio. And eBay. Basically anywhere I could find them selling anything at all I reported them. I wrote to the APA and apologized for my terse email and sent them copies of the photos of the book along with all the seller's personal information. They respond and say they're going to send it to their legal folks and ask if it's okay if they contact me for more info. Finally, I report them to the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center. Today I happened upon my old APA manual and I started wondering whatever happened to them, so I dug up the emails with the info and went looking. They no longer have seller profiles on any of the sites. Their website has been taken over by a domain reseller. The house appears to have been sold last year, which may not be related, but I'd like to think it is. And the owner's Facebook page lists them as now working at a place that turns out to be a payday lender. I dug through their timeline and found someone asking in October of last year if they were still selling books and them replying with no. Had to stop. Also, my professor raised my grade to a B+. The next one is titled, "The Chocolate XLAX Did All the Work." When I was in 4th grade, we took a class trip to the symphony and I loved it. If you've ever heard a live symphony, then you know how amazing the sound is. I'd never heard something that awesome before and was so excited that I turned to my friend next to me and made a comment, something like, "Wow, this is totally rad." Well, there were 2 girls sitting behind us and they complained to the teacher, saying that my friend and I had talked through the whole performance and ruined it for them. Well, my buddy and I got in some serious trouble for that and we had to sit in detention for several recesses. Detention was super boring, no talking or reading, you just had to sit there. With nothing else to do, I plotted my revenge. The next week, I brought some chocolate-flavored X-Lax to class. I apologized to the girls for being such a terrible disturbance during the symphony and offered them the chocolate just before class got started. The first hour passed without any action, but in the middle of math, things got interesting. It's important to say that our teacher was a pretty old-school authoritarian and had a very strict hall pass policy, only one student out at a time. So as the girls started to squirm and act uncomfortable, I told my friend to take the hall pass. Almost immediately, the girls' hands went up, asking to use the bathroom. No go, as my buddy had the hall pass. They squirmed and pleaded and begged and still, our teacher wouldn't let them go. And then, that magical moment I hadn't dared hoped for, in the middle of reviewing our multiplication tables, they crapped their pants. So awesome, so much win. Everyone in the class nearly died laughing, then nearly died gagging. It was soon revealed that I was responsible and I was sent to the principal's office and my family was threatened with criminal charges, but the months of teasing that those two little chits endured made it worth it. The next one is titled, Keep Nagging About Lettuce? Cool, have an old batch for full price. Working at a grocery store, I get to deal with lovely customers and co-workers on a daily basis. People don't realize we can't control what the product looks like when we receive it, and that the managers are the ones who order the product, not us. So there's a lady who comes in regularly, always complains about something not being immaculate. It doesn't matter what it is, potatoes have a lot of dirt on them, these apples are shaped a little too oval. Guy in aisle 2 smells, the store is too cold, our kale is half the size of another store's. Never fails to find something wrong. She walks over to me one day and expresses her feelings about our lettuce being slightly wilted, something about the ends being a little flimsy, and demands I go into the back room and bring her a fresh bunch. I politely explained to her that what was out there was fresh, I put some out 20 minutes beforehand, and that there was nothing wrong with it. She goes back to shopping and scanning the store for things to complain about. 5 minutes later I hear the angry shuffling of a buggy and fumbling of a bag. Lettuce lady is back. She struggles with getting a head of lettuce out of a bag and presents it to me, some leaves ripped from her aggressive removal. She exclaims that it is unfit for a horse to eat and that I need to reduce it for her. I take the product and look it over, nothing was wrong except for the leaves she had ripped. I tell her I can't reduce it because there's nothing wrong with it. She persists, saying the leaves are wilted and ripped, there's a small brown spot at the bottom, if you hold it a certain way you can see the devil on one of the leaves. It's not as green as the others. I'm a patient person, but she was getting on my nerves, like every time before, so I agreed to reduce it and took the lettuce into the back room. Luckily it wasn't a busy night, so I spent a little time sweeping and cleaning. I stacked some product and cleaned up the storage area. I spent about an hour and a half back there, expecting her to have given up on waiting. Nope. I walked back onto the floor and she's in the same spot, obviously tried for patience. She asks where the lettuce is. I wanted to say a number of things, but I headed back into the storage room and proceeded to exchange her lettuce for an older, less friendly bunch. I wrapped it and marked it as regular price, then headed back onto the floor. She gladly received the lettuce and went back to aggressively scanning the store for imperfections. The last one is titled, Whenever the call went to voicemail, they learned about her infidelity. Well, my girlfriend, of then 6 years, and I had broken up. Well, more accurately, she had broken up with me. This was 4 months after us moving across the country from NJ to CO under her request, so she could live near her parents. I had gotten a job, but other than that, I was a stranger in a strange land. She told me to move out of the apartment that we had just gotten, even though her parents lived right down the street and she could easily go live with them. She could not afford our apartment on her own, I could, and she eventually did jump ship and I lost my deposit and I had nowhere to go. I pleaded with her to give me the apartment. She didn't care. Her whole mentality through the whole thing was that she was not giving an inch for any reason, even if it was for the benefit of everyone. Anyhow, so one day I go back to our place to talk to her. I really wanted her back and I couldn't understand why, out of the blue, she didn't want to be with me after 6 years or so. I kept asking her if she was with someone else. Because, to me, that would be the nail and I would just move on. But she insisted over and over that this wasn't the case. Sometime during this conversation, she said she was going to go to my friend's house and have him come pick me up. I had nothing. I sold everything I had, including my car, to get us to Colorado. This friend had dropped me off there after I requested he do so. I was living on his couch, and many others. So, at this point, my ex went to get him to come to get me. While she was gone, for some unknown reason, I decided to check the voicemail. The first message went something like this: Hi Tina, listen, you need to change your voicemail. It says, we are not home. And, well, if Alex calls and hears that, he is going to know that you have had a boyfriend the whole time you have been dating him. And that is how I found out. I was devastated and fuming angry at the same time. The truth, it finally came out, and she had been lying to me and cheating on me this whole time, and she dragged me across the country, by happenstance, to do it. So, I did what any rational person would do under these circumstances. I changed the access code to the voicemail. I then changed the outgoing message to, Hi. This is Halbowitz. Unfortunately, I'm not at home right now because it ends up Tina has been unfaithful to me and has been sleeping with a guy named Alex. Of course, she never fessed up to it and thought it would be easier just to kick me out of house and home with nothing more than the shirt on my back and her lies denying her infidelity in my head. And I also said some other choice things. But, for the most part, that is the message I left. Well, since the phone was in my name, she had a hard time getting that message off the voicemail. So, for weeks after that, anyone who called when she was not home was greeted to that message. And since she didn't have much of a reason to call her own number and hear the message, she didn't know I had changed it for some time and was livid when she found out. I'll admit though, I did get a small amount of satisfaction from it. She did everything she could to make the breakup as rocky as possible while I bent over backward to appease her. So, this, as small as it was something for me to hang my hat on. Thanks for listening.